Good morning, good morning, good morning, beautiful people of LinkedIn. We are live. Good morning, good morning, good morning. If you are watching this live, please do say good morning in the chat, right? Good morning. It takes a while to connect through to LinkedIn, so just just bear with me while we just make sure that everybody's got an opportunity to join, because it does take a little while. So good morning if you are watching me live. I am live. I know sometimes when it's kind of like holidays, I sometimes pre-record and I release it and then I'm in the chat, but this morning I promise you, I am live. It's Thursday morning. Sun is shining a little bit cloudy. But this morning I'm doing a Q&A. I'm doing a Q&A and a bit of an Ask Me Anything based on the ERG leader survey. Well, based mainly on the ERG leader survey and some of the questions, which are really common questions that came out of that. And also I did a session with some ERG leaders. I'm going to say, was it 2 weeks ago, I think? And I had a Slido running, which is something that I often do. So I had a Slido where people could literally ask me anything, right, in the Slido. And that's what we did. So I've got some of those questions as well for you. So yeah, good morning if you are joining. Thank you again. Before we start, I'm going to say a really big thank you to Harper Fox Partners, who the organization, some of you might know, Scarlett Allen Horton, who runs Harper Fox Partners, and I partnered with them to create the ERG Leader Guide. So, good morning, Junior. You crack me up. Oh my gosh. Good morning, Andrea Southall. How are you doing? It's really good to be with you. It feels like a Friday, but it's Thursday, and we need more 4-day weeks. Is what we need. we joining you, Oprah. Okay, glad you managed to get live before the bank holiday, Bobs. Thankful Thursday. Hashtag Thankful Thursday. Absolutely. And I'm going to be doing a lot more of this sort of content if people find it useful, but probably on YouTube. And if there's time, I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. I want to create a space where I can address as many kind of like live questions and challenges that I'm hearing. There was a brilliant challenge that I saw on LinkedIn yesterday that I'll mention if I get time, but I have got a lot to cover. But thank you for joining. If you have got any questions, like genuinely, if you've got any questions that you're struggling with at the moment with your employee network, if you're joining me on LinkedIn or YouTube, I know I can see that we've got a couple of people on LinkedIn, on YouTube as well. Please do feel free to drop them in the chat, and hopefully I'll get round to everything. Good morning, Hansa Pednagari. How are you? How has your week been? How's the weather looking where you guys are? I know obviously if we're in the UK, the weather's getting a bit changeable. I've even heard that there might be snow before the end of April, which is like, well, it's the UK weather, right? So please do just let me know how the weather's been, or how your week has been. 4-day week. I love the 4-day week. I'm actually trying to get somebody from the 4-day week campaign on this show. I did a deep dive into 4-day week. I genuinely think that by 2030, a lot more organizations are going to be working a 4-day week. That's my prediction. You heard it here first. Anyway, right, I'm going to get into these questions now, because I feel like I'm rabbiting on. So I've some of you, if you were on the webinar, the March webinar, you may recognize some of these questions. But as I say, some of these questions are questions that I've had in the last couple of weeks from ERG leaders that I've been working with. And so I just thought I'd share them with you. So I'm going to be going at breakneck speed, but please feel free to either comment on some of the questions that you see, if it's something you've experienced, or if you've got new questions, just put them in the comments, and I will sort of stop and interject, and I'll go straight to your questions if I can as well. So I'm going to start with the first question here. Can you share some examples of how to engage members outside of events? If you've been listening to me for a while, or if you've worked with me, you'll know kind of what my go-to is on this. So first of all, first of all, let me just focus on the events first, because I know events is like the foundation, like the foundational pillars for most networks. The one thing I would say about events is, if you can, and this is some feedback that we took on the back of the last ERG Leader Summit, if you can, always include an element of more structured networking. This is something we're going to be doing this year. So even if it is an event, whether it's literally just a networker, or you've got some sort of like panel, or an internal speaker, or it's a lunch and learn, whatever it be, try to make some sort of like structured networking element, so that people are getting something from it, that they're maybe meeting people that they haven't met before, that they're learning a bit more about a department they haven't met before, especially if you've got senior leaders attending as well. So some sort of networking where people are actually feel as though they're getting something out of it is a good way of engaging, so that it's not people just turning up to an event and kind of just like listening, right? You want it to make it as more interactive as possible. And then the other thing I always say in terms of the best way to engage members is to feel as though they are actually doing something, that they are actually making a difference. And so I've got a couple of stories of organizations where people get tired of events and get fatigued, and maybe attendance starts to drop off. But then once they have a piece of work, so for example, if there's something the organization is doing and they ask for input from the ERG, from the employee network, that's when people tend to be engaged, because they can see that it's making a difference to the organization. And as well, actually, they can probably see how it's going to benefit them in their day job in terms of the value that they bring to the organization. So that's one of the things around creating engagement as well. Hectic day, absolutely. So Junior, for those that don't know, if you're watching, Junior Beeman from NatWest runs the Rainbow Network. Hectic day yesterday for the ERG with the announcement of the ruling in Scotland about trans women. Another reminder of how much resilience you need for this type of work. Any comments on this, Cheryl? Yeah, it's a really I mean, I'm wearing my gender t-shirt today, so I have these t-shirts. As Junior will know, you were on here last week. I have a t-shirt which is I don't want to flash too much, but my t-shirt is this way: gender, what a drag, right? So yeah, any comments on this? I mean, there is my comment around if you are running a network like a rainbow network or a pride network or LGBTQ plus network, you've probably got a lot of members that are feeling quite anxious, just generally around things that are going on in society. And then obviously the ruling. So the ruling that Junior is referring to is the ruling from the UK Supreme Court yesterday around definitions of sex and gender for the Equalities Act. And so it's definitely worth looking into if you're not familiar with it. I probably haven't got the time to go into all of it at the moment, but what I would say is, if you are running a network, and you, particularly if you have individuals who are who identify as non-binary or trans, there may be a need to reach out to those members, and also maybe to create some safe spaces that are facilitated. And if you don't have the internal expertise to facilitate that, there are some brilliant ambassadors and experts on LinkedIn that can help with that as well. But I think that's where I would be going if you're a network. Interested to know, Junior, whether you've already decided what you're going to be doing in terms of next steps. But I think there's something around getting the clarity. So getting the clarity, if you are a network leader, about the ruling and exactly what it says and what it means for you. But then, being that sort of sounding board, but also taking care of your own sort of like mental health and well-being as an ERG leader as well, because you may have a lot of people kind of coming to you. And this isn't just affecting, even though the legislation was kind of like around the definitions for trans individuals based on, gender recognition certificates and all of that sort of thing. But from what I've seen on LinkedIn, there is potentially an increase in homophobia more broadly, right, more generally. So just, I would also say, just think more widely in terms of the whole kind of like LGBTQ plus community as well, because even though the legislation is specific to sex and gender, I'm sort of sensing that it's kind of opened the floodgates a little bit for a bit more hatred towards the whole sort of like LGBTQ plus community. So that's one of the things I would say. Andrea said, just arriving into Birmingham and it's looking pretty nice. The weather is looking pretty good, Andrea. I totally agree. On to my next question. This is a really common one. This is one I got a couple of weeks ago, and it was, how do we engage frontline workers or operational staff that don't often look at email and Teams messages? The challenge of engaging and or even just communicating with colleagues who maybe work at operational sites, or they don't sit in an office, because typically employee resource groups and employee networks tend to be run by people that sit in offices. So how do you engage people that don't sit in offices? Sometimes you have people in an organization that don't even have access to email, right? So how do you do that? The first thing I always say is liaise with your internal comms team, because they have this challenge all of the time, right? They need to communicate things to everyone in the organization. They have individuals that don't have email. So you almost need to figure out what are the channels that are being used by internal comms. And those channels can be totally different. They can be things like what's the word? Boards, right? Physical boards, sort of team boards, notice boards, whiteboards. They can be staff briefings that happen in a lot of, operational roles. There is many organizations I can think of where a lot of shifts, for example, depending on the type of work, but a lot of shifts often start with an operational briefing, and that is sometimes used as a way. So sometimes material is given to the operational supervisor or the line leader that is giving that brief, and sometimes that's a way of feeding things in. So the thing I would say is, first of all, work with internal comms to figure out what channels they use, but then connect in with individuals from the operational sites to figure out, again, are they using notice boards? Are they using something else? The other thing I would say is get yourself out to the operational sites. And this is where there's a real benefit in employee network leaders coming together, because there's only a few of you. But if you can come together as committees and think to yourself, okay, we've got loads of operational sites, but actually, is there a way that we can maybe get out to some of those sites and share the work across the network, so that when one person goes to an operational site, they may well be a part of, for example, the women's network, but they go and they represent all of the networks, right? So that can be a way of doing it in terms of a way of connecting into those operational sites. So just checking back in with your comment here, Junior. We've engaged everyone we need to, our comms team to help with our bank-wide statement, our legal team, our wellbeing team, and our employee assistance program to help facilitate the safe space. And of course, my offer of coaching, great points. The importance of stakeholder engagement for ERG. So brilliant example there, Junior, in terms of, so for anybody else that is watching that maybe looks after their Pride network or their LGBTQ plus network or their Rainbow network or the Glamazon network, as I know it's called at Amazon, for example. So yeah, checking in with those key departments, comms, legal, wellbeing, and your employee assistance program. Absolutely. Comment here from Dilwyn, from Rix, I believe. Dilwyn, thank you for joining us. Generally, frontline workers also have a work phone, so maybe a WhatsApp group could work here. Absolutely, yeah, definitely. If especially if frontline workers have a work phone. I know it's not always the case if frontline workers, especially if frontline workers are kind of like more casual, so they may be sort of like relatively junior, so they may not have a work phone. But you're absolutely right, Dilwyn. I think the point that you're making here is think about how these groups are already being communicated to by other people, whether that be, like line managers or payroll or whoever. I know in many organizations, I know often messages are sent out with payroll, right? Because everybody gets a pay slip, everybody gets communication from payroll. So that's one of the ways. What are the common issues to avoid to keep members feel connected and engaged? I mean, one of the things I talk about is the importance of surveys. And obviously, a lot of these questions came out of the survey that we did and the webinar. I always sort of say, survey your members. If you feel that engagement's starting to dip off and you haven't done a survey for a while, survey your members. Obviously, I also talk about getting feedback after every event. So don't just be like running this calendar of event and not getting feedback. And when you are collecting feedback, really asking about the things that really worked and asking about the things that didn't work. And then you're more likely to get a sense of the types of activities that people want to see more of going forward. One of the things actually that I'm going to do a post about this maybe over the bank holiday weekend, but I know of a couple of networks that do book clubs, right? And I know that the membership can kind of the attendance can kind of ebb and flow for a book club. But I'm kind of gate crashing Tesco's book club next week, just because I always get an invite from their brilliant one of their brilliant ERG leaders, and I often can't make it. And if I haven't read the book, obviously I'm not going to turn up. But I love books, and so if you do have a book club for your ERG. And you want to invite me, if I've read the book, I'll be there because I absolutely love a book club. So something like that, having different types of events, can be really useful, and just kind of like creating a really good sort of like flow of two-way communications that you can see what actually works. I think is really important. But I think we've talked about some of the common issues in terms of the challenge of frontline staff, event fatigue, etc. as well. So this next one, any recommendations for learning how to build community? I'm going to link it back to what Dilwyn was saying, kind of in terms of, and I think this links on maybe to the next question, but in terms of engaging with people, just use as many ways as possible, ideally tying in with your internal comms strategy. But the one thing that I want to talk about is tools, tech and tools. So a question I had here was lack of appropriate tools as being a barrier to engaging with members. Now, something that I'm aware of is I know some organizations use Microsoft Viva Engage, or some organizations use Microsoft Teams as well for the employee network members, as well as just the committee. So there are different ways of using the technology, and I probably haven't got enough time to go into all of it today. But something like Viva Engage, say, or Slack, if you use a Slack channel. I know some companies use Discord. I know for some companies you can't actually access Discord. But just really have a think about some of the tools that are already being used in your organization for community. If Viva Engage is something that you are using, there is some really good information from an organization called Swoop Analytics. They're actually going to be one of the partners at the ERG Leaders Summit this year, because I think what they do is incredible in terms of trying to figure out how to build community, like using, kind of like these online platforms and tech and tools. And potentially for frontline workers that maybe don't have access to email, I know that Viva Engage I want to say in the last 6 to 9 months or so, have released an app version. So even if somebody doesn't necessarily have access to like company email, they can potentially still access the network's community pages on Viva Engage if that's something you're using. So if your organization is already using Viva Engage, just connect with internal comms or whoever's looking at that to see if you can have a community page as well. If it's something that your organization isn't using, but you are a Microsoft house, then maybe raise it, because it is an opportunity. And a lot of companies are using it not just for the employee networks, but they're using it for all kinds of community groups, right? And they don't have to be private. They can sort of still be open, and you can like put all sorts of settings and things on it as well. Andrew, I love this. We're looking at starting a Netflix and lunch. Oh, love that. Where we discuss TV rather than books. Absolutely. You can do that format with anything. You can do it with Netflix, you can do it with films, you can do it with TED Talks, you can do it with articles. It almost doesn't matter, but yeah, it's like there is a something, a resource, a show, a book, an article or whatever, where we discuss TV rather than books. It feels less time intensive for members than trying to fit in a whole book. My advice around books and book clubs is, if you're choosing a book, make sure there is an audio book. And then what I used to run book clubs for many, many years. I would always make sure that there wasn't only an audio book, but also there was like a summary YouTube video that somebody could watch if they just wanted like the 15-minute version of the book, and then they were still welcome to come to the book club. So yeah, absolutely making it accessible. Netflix and lunch, I love it because Netflix has got such a rich range of diversity in terms of its content. I'm really keen to know what you're starting with, what show you're starting with, Andrea, as well. And I'm going to be looking out for my invite as well, just to say that. Junior, if you're going to create chat groups for people with specific characteristics and they're going to talk about those characteristics, just check with your data and legal teams around GDPR first to protect your business and your ERG. There can be a lot of red tape, particularly with things like WhatsApp. Yeah, WhatsApp. It can be a little bit of a minefield, and I think you're absolutely right, Junior. In terms of, WhatsApp. I actually would say that that something like a Viva Engage or something like a Slack channel, so something that's kind of like within the organization, is probably better than a kind of like offline WhatsApp channel. That's just my suggestion, because you're absolutely right, June. And I think also because WhatsApp is something that we use in our personal life a lot, people tend to be a lot freer, which is good on on the one hand, but it can open you up to challenges. So I would say you're probably going to be safer, and it's going to be easier to kind of like set rules and adhere to them if you're on like a company provided platform, right? So you're absolutely right, Junior, in terms of the risks around something like a WhatsApp channel. Good morning, Nicola. How are you doing? Nicola is one of the amazing network leaders from Eon, but I'm going to say maybe now seconded into to NPower. Good morning, all. We use a combination of Slack and Teams for community and member engagement. I'll definitely check out Viva Engage. Yeah, Slack and Teams, and it's interesting. And I don't know, Nicola, whether you use one in particular, maybe just for the committee, because I know that a lot of people, for example, use their Teams channel more for their committee or for their leadership team who are like planning and organizing and all of that. And then maybe they're using Slack or, Viva Engage. Viva Engage is basically just the new Yammer. So if anybody remembers Yammer from like a few years ago, that is now Viva Engage. There's also, what is the Google one called? Work something. I can't remember what it's called. But yeah, absolutely. I think the Viva Engage thing is useful if the whole company's moving towards that. And some companies have really started to embrace that as a way, even just as a way of like senior leaders engaging with the wider organization as well. Right, interested to get some tips on how to effectively engage members with no budget. I feel like what we've talked about so far and some of the brilliant examples around like, tech and tools and stuff, Netflix and I won't say Netflix and chill, Netflix and lunch discussions, these things don't take a lot of budget, really. So there is something about not everything has to have budget. The one thing I would say about budget, though, is this is where you kind of need to get a bit smart in terms of, if, for example, you wanted to take an event, and it could just be a networking event, or it could be like your Netflix and discussion. If you're going to do it live, can you find a senior leader who's happy to have it at their site and, pay for some refreshments or something, right? Sometimes there's ways of like, if you can build those networks internally, sometimes you will find that budget suddenly appears, right? Budget will appear if you can influence the right people and get input and engagement from the right people as well. There's a question here, which is a really common one. I think this came out of the webinar. So the question is, should ERGs be open or closed? So only for members of a marginalized group or certain identity, or for anyone in an organization? I'm going to really be going into this in some detail on YouTube. This is part of the reason that I'm setting up the YouTube, is that I can really deep dive into a lot of these questions and topics. In particular, based on what's going on in the States at the moment, like legally, and I think some of those winds are blowing over a little bit. The advice generally around this, particularly if you're in the States, it's a no-brainer. If you're in the States, it has to be open, right? That's otherwise you're opening yourself up potentially to some legal action. And so if you're in the UK or other countries as well, and I'm going to be doing, again, on the YouTube channel, I'm going to be doing more around ERGs in other countries, because I think there are some massive lessons to be learned based on a lot of the conversations I have. So you need to really start thinking about if some of your events and or meetings are closed, start to think about what can we open up, and also what are the roles of individuals that come in that maybe aren't members of that community or members of that identity, and have clear, almost like terms of engagement around it, so that everybody's clear what they're coming in for, and everybody's clear in terms of, how they are there to sort of like use their voice, and the fact that they're maybe not there to overpower others and, remove the voices of other people in that particular ERG. So that's something to think about if you're going from a position where some of your events and or your groups or chats, etc., are closed, to opening them up. Just start to get really intentional about the reason for opening them up. I think opening them is a good idea, by the way, so just to like clarify that. But I think it's useful if you can put some guidelines in there, in the same way that you have guidelines around, the purpose of the planning committee, the role of the planning committee, the role of different people in the community, the role of your members. The clearer you can get about the role, the easier it is to then open up without fear of something that's going to go wrong. Now, there is a case that I saw, somebody posted on LinkedIn yesterday about a group. This is in the States, where obviously they're now having to open up, and a senior leader, who sounds like the senior leader is not an ally of the group, I'll just put it like that, has specifically asked to join that group, and only that particular group, none of the other ERGs, and is maybe not being the most supportive. And there's something about how to manage that, and that's something I'm going to probably be going into on the YouTube channel, because there's not the time to do it here. But I think something around definitions is really useful. What can ERGs be doing past education to support a safe space, a space for allies? This goes again to the purpose, really, in terms of why do we want, or why do we not want allies to be in the room? And thinking about, even for example, Andrea, thinking about your Netflix and discussion. If you maybe take an example of something like that you're going to make like a regular event, a regular feature, just almost like play it through in your mind in terms of, what does success look like? What do you want people in that discussion to take away from the session? How do you want them feeling when they leave the session? And then think about allies in terms of, in that, to this question here around, we don't want it to be just around education necessarily, in terms of when allies come into that space. So again, for me, it's thinking about how we define the role of the ally. For me, I think one of the benefits actually of having allies in is that allies actually provide a sounding board as to what is going to land with the wider organization, and maybe where some of the gaps are, right? So that's one of the benefits of having allies even involved in things like planning meetings, right? Because you can actually plan it around what is that wider need of the organization, and less around only the needs of the community. So a comment here from Andrea: I'm looking at resetting how we work with our exec sponsor. Now I've got a new co-chair. How often should we be meeting with them? They already try and join all our network meetings when possible. Okay, when it comes to exec sponsors, if your exec sponsor wants to join all network meetings, amazing, right? Perfect. My thoughts, and I take this from my experience running big change programs, big transformations. They can, if they want to join all your network meetings, they can. What I would say, Andrea, I would say, for me, the priority when it comes to exec sponsors, because obviously you want the the visibility thing. You know, you want that visual support and the championing. What I really like with exec sponsors is where you get one-to-one time with them as a chair or as a co-chair. So what I would want is a 1 hour one-to-one just with you. So if it's you and your co-chair, so it's you and your co-chair with the sponsor, just the three of you, just the three of you. Because that's kind of where you're having almost like that leadership conversation. And I know you've got a committee, right? I get that. I know you've got a committee as well that's involved in the planning and all of that. But there's something about just you and the sponsor, and that's where the sponsor can then be more vocal, because what you don't want the sponsor doing is coming into the network meetings and people kind of like deferring to the sponsor, and the sponsor not knowing how much they want to speak, not speak, they don't want to take over, all of that. But if you have a session outside of that where it really is just sponsor to chairs, that's where, you know, the sponsor's free to kind of speak up. You can bounce things off the sponsor. The sponsor is therefore then helping you lead, you know, the committee and the network, the members, right? So that's what I would say. I would actually be looking to get one-to-one time with you and your co-chair and the sponsor. Let's have a look at this question, Nicola. We're in the process of launching a chapter of our ERG in Germany, so I'd be interested to learn more about what other ERGs are doing in other countries. Absolutely. There's so much that I could go into, and there are some challenges, right? And if you're launching a chapter of the ERG in Germany, you probably already know about some of the challenges around GDPR. So GDPR, for those that maybe aren't joining from the UK or Europe, you know, it's this data protection act that kind of sits across Europe, but it affects different companies in Europe differently. So different countries have different rules, not just because of GDPR, but some of it because of legacy. And obviously Germany has a legacy. So what you sometimes get in terms of when it comes to things like data, and obviously data is key for ERGs, but you may well face a little bit of pushback when it comes to certain types of data and asking certain types of questions. So you kind of have to like get a little bit smart. But definitely there are lessons to be learned from other countries in terms of what they're doing around ERGs. And I actually think the scope of ERGs is really changing. I'll just say that again, the scope and the purpose of ERGs is changing. So I know often we talk about ERGs as being like these spaces for marginalized or historically underrepresented groups. But the scope of that is changing, whereby, you know, and I see when we're pulling together the ERG Leader Summit, we've now got ERGs that are set up for people that have relocated to a new country, right? Obviously, you've got early careers ERGs, you've got sustainability ERGs, you've got, you know, there are all kinds of ERGs are morphing from not just communities of identity, but also communities of interest. And I don't think it's a bad thing, to be honest. I actually think it kind of almost like gives protection to ERGs that are identity based. If you think about the backlash from the States that's kind of sweeping across, if ERGs have this broader remit where it's kind of like just okay for groups of employees to get together around a common interest, a common kind of goal, a sort of like shared value, that actually gives the whole area of ERGs a little bit more protection from some of the backlash that's blowing across the pond. How can we drive male allyship for our women's network ERG? So some of you will know that I talk a lot about men's networks. And I was doing some work last year with an organization where I was talking about this, because a question similar to this came up, and we got into the conversation around whether this organization should have a men's network, right? And what was interesting, somebody there said that they know of somebody in I won't disclose who the organization is, but a very large public sector organization in the UK. So you can maybe guess who that is. And they were giving feedback that once they started a men's network, they discovered that allyship for the other networks ramped up, because there's something in this about the what's in it for me. So once men realize that they have something to gain from this type of work, from work around inclusion and belonging and progression, you tend to then find that men are happier to kind of step into the role as ally. In fact, I think what tends to happen once you get ERGs working together better and working more intersectionally, people start to become more allies of each other. So my answer to this, just being a little bit radical in terms of how can you drive male allyship for a women's network, create a men's network. And the other one I would say as well is things like, I know a lot of organizations have parents and carers networks. Get more men leading those networks, right? That again, it just kind of shifts the paradigm slightly in terms of some of the challenges of women. And I'm gonna, you will definitely see allyship increase once you start to sort of like look at men in a different light, basically. What are effective ways for an ERG with circa 200 members and a yearly budget of around 3,000 to spend their budget other than getting external speakers in? I mean, in terms of an alternative to external speakers is obviously it's either internal speakers in terms of people from different teams, coming and sharing their expertise, but you can also obviously get other speakers from other ERGs, right? Or there's, speakers. I think I've done a post about this. You can get speakers from professional bodies, from charities, from all sorts of organizations who will not be looking for a fee anyway, right? So you can get those speakers in. Obviously, there are other types of events that don't take budget, and I think Andrea's example of the Netflix and chill is perfect. And then obviously we've got things like book clubs and all kinds of things, basically. So let's move on to this next question. Our organisation has several ERGs, all with co-leads and supported by the central EDI team, which is always good. What are good ways that we can improve intersectionality among these ERGs? The intersectionality is a good one. Obviously, we're all intersectional, right? None of us is just one thing. We all wear different hats. I am female. I'm also a Black woman. So we're all intersectional. The one thing that I would say is look at the committee, look at the co-leads and look at the committee. So, most networks have at least 2 co-leads. Some have 3. If you can get intersectionality in the co-leads, perfect. If not, don't force it. We're not doing like tick boxes here, but try to at least get it in the planning committee. So if your organization's big enough, I'm conscious that not all organizations are big enough to have a planning committee that's separate to the members, right? But if you do have a small planning committee of, typical number is like between 5 and 10 people. So if you've got a planning committee, just try to make sure that in that planning committee, it is intersectional, right? To make sure that you are actually looking at this through different lenses. And then obviously, working with other ERGs. If you don't currently have a monthly catch up, at least a monthly catch up with all of the other ERGs, it's something I would absolutely be recommending. And I would suggest that you maybe talk to your central EDI team to kind of like help to coordinate that, because that does get people thinking intersectionally. What do we think about co-sponsors? I think this was asked at the webinar that we did. I've absolutely seen it work. I know of one particular individual who has 3 co-sponsors, and it worked a treat. The benefits of it is that sometimes sponsors are struggling in terms of capacity, so they may have a lot on, in terms of their own area of responsibility within the business. In their directorate, things might be really busy, or they might be going through massive change that they have to deal with, because bear in mind, your exec sponsors have a day job as well, so sometimes they may be really busy. So by having more sponsors, you're spreading the workload across more sponsors. The negatives of this model is maybe only if they all just like hand back because they think that somebody else is going to be doing the work. That's probably, the only negative. I mean, potentially you've got the negative of, if they have conflicting ideas in terms of doing something, but I think that risk is quite low. Yeah, I advise exec sponsors to meet with ERG leadership team monthly and increase contacts and check-ins around key events. Is that feasible? I think we've spoken about, I've sort of spoken about that already. The other thing I would add though is if you haven't done any stakeholder mapping for your senior leaders, definitely something that you should consider doing. So not just your exec sponsor. I advise exec sponsors to meet with ERG leadership. Oh, right. Okay. Exec sponsors meeting with ERG leadership team monthly. Yeah. Okay. Right. So we've talked about ERG leadership team meeting with exec sponsors. I always say if you need to do what I call stakeholder mapping across all senior leaders, right, as chairs. Don't only rely on your exec sponsors. If your exec sponsors great, they will be doing a lot of the legwork to making sure that other senior leaders are on board. But one of the bits of feedback we got from the survey was that even though 95% of ERGs have an exec sponsor, something like only, well, 2/3 felt that they didn't have adequate support from the general, like, senior leadership population. So one of the ways that you can do that is, you know, do a stakeholder map or stakeholder analysis of all of the senior leaders, right? Everybody that sits at the same level as your exec sponsor. And if there is somebody that kind of, has clout, so they have influence, and they're either an ally or they're not really an ally, those are people that you need to be sitting down with. You need to get some time with them, maybe like once a quarter. It could be once a quarter, it could be once every 6 months, where you sit down, you say, look, this is what we're about in our ERG. What are your thoughts? Kind of get some feedback. You'd be amazed how far those sorts of conversations will go in terms of starting to really build up support for what it is that you're doing. Yeah, so that's just something that I would suggest. So think beyond your one exec sponsor. Really engage with ERG with senior leaders broader than just your sponsor. Co-sponsorship has worked exceptionally well for our ERG. Absolutely. I don't think enough people use it. And even I would say, even if your DEI lead has only kind of given you, allocated you one sponsor, there's nothing stopping you from either asking for another one formally, or identifying the one person that you think you would like to have, and ideally, again, it's somebody with clout, etc., somebody that's demonstrated that they're a really strong ally. This question here, I think this came out of the webinar. So business case for EDI, and maybe for investing in ERG programs. So there are a couple of things. I thought I'd included them in here. There are a couple of, there's one paper that I really like, which it is actually a McKinsey paper, but it's specifically around effective ERGs. Let me just go back. There is actually a very recent example. It's specific to an industry. So the Project Management Institute did a survey across construction and looked at the effectiveness and collaboration of teams in projects. And those in organizations that had ERGs had a more successful rate in terms of collaboration if they had ERGs. I'll try to remember to link it in the comments below. There are some other ones as well. But the research around ERGs is a little bit sketchy, but there are some others, and I will link them in the comments. I thought I had them in this deck, but maybe not. So I'll put them in the comments afterwards. Okay, how do you manage? Right. How do you manage the issue of expecting ERGs to work unremunerated for this work? We currently have ERGs working on collecting data, concerns and requirements from their ERG members. Then EDI, HR, or the teams work on it. It feels like too much of an ask, and expecting unpaid labour to expect ERG leaders to do anything more. Yeah, this is a tricky one. As a minimum, so certainly in the UK, most ERG leaders are not remunerated. There is no financial compensation, and I think in the States, when the last time I looked, it was maybe only around 30%. I think it was around the third mark, but this was about a year ago. So it's not typically remunerated separately, which, to be fair, when it comes to things like projects and programs, often people aren't necessarily remunerated on top of their day job. However, when it comes to projects and programs, people are usually at least maybe bonused on it. So it's maybe included in their bonus objectives. And it's usually taken into account in your performance review, right? And so I always say, as a minimum, try to make sure that this work is included in your performance review, and have the conversation with your line manager. If your line manager doesn't seem to be supportive, this is where potentially your sponsor or HR or EDI, DEI, EDI team can support, because there's no reason why it shouldn't be accounted for in your performance review, because you're going above and beyond your day job. So, and you know, if, for example, you do have a bonus scheme, that's typically what bonuses are for. It's for when you go above and beyond your day job. So that's where I would start. I would start with just at least making sure it's reflected in your performance review. If you have a bonus, then that's a bonus. Financial compensation. Is there anything else that ERG leads could ask for to compensate them? So I've talked obviously about the bonuses. So I know some organizations give time off, or they sort of like allocate time to work on the ERG. Obviously, if that's the case, you really have to think about whether your outputs are also kind of reduced in order to account for the time. So it may or may not be a win there in terms of giving individuals time. How to balance progress against mindfulness of people's day jobs. The other thing that I'd mention in terms of time and how much time is spent on this work, bearing in mind that original question that talked about ERGs collecting data, dealing with people's queries, etc. This is where a RACI can be really useful. Some people have heard me talk about this before. So a RACI, RACI, stands for who is responsible, who is accountable, who is consulted, who is informed. You sometimes find that ERGs end up doing work that really ain't your job. You know, it really should be done by somebody who's being paid to do that work. So sometimes by working on the RACI, and this is something that I've done with DI and HR teams and exec sponsors, and then also the network leads, jointly working on that RACI, so that everybody's crystal clear who is doing what. And so not, you know, we don't have too much work falling onto the ERG. So that is another way of kind of like balancing the workload, albeit, you know, part of the reason for sort of burnout often with ERGs isn't necessarily the workload, you know, it's the emotional toil. So that's something to be mindful of. What are ways to better work with HR and a company to drive things like policy change, benefit selection offer to help groups of employees? We've found on various occasions that we get pushback from HR. So this is where the RACI comes into play. What can be really useful here, though, as kind of like evidence or data, or almost like, I don't want to say ammunition, but evidence that some of these things need to be tackled, is if you actually cover them in your annual survey. So if you run an annual survey as an ERG across your members, and you maybe list out a few policies or, you know, benefits, because sometimes these are the things that you can delve into that the employee survey really doesn't delve into, right? So if you've got some evidence to go to HR with and say, look, we surveyed our members and 80% of the members said that, you know, such and such a policy, it would be great if we could review it because it doesn't accommodate the community in this way. The other thing that you can do as well to strengthen your case for looking at things like, you know, policy, benefit selection, is again working across your fellow ERGs, right? So the more of you there are saying, we need to look at this policy, we need to look at these flexible benefits that are on offer, the greater chance you have of getting to it. And obviously, when it comes to things like the policy review, you do have to work with the policy owner. And I use the term policy owner because as ERGs, we're not the owner, really. And the role of the ERG really is more of a consult. So you're there to kind of like consult and say, this is what the members think would be useful. And it's up to the policy owner, you know, and or the business owner. So, for example, if it's benefit selection, it's up to the head of benefit, the head of comp and bens, to maybe go and do the legwork with your input. And then it's like a two-way conversation, right? So it's just, I think it's clarifying basically the rules of engagement. So Junior, in terms of how it works, where Junior Beaming is for us, there's allocated time so that it can mainly form part of your contracted hours, yeah, but also the exposure. We are treated as leaders, so we get invites to certain exco events and much broader exposure, which often helps with career progression too. And our CEO values what we do and talks about it. Yeah, do you know what the sometimes when we talk about the fact that this is done side of desk and there's no remuneration and all of that, it can sometimes sound a bit negative. But even when we did the ERG leader survey, it was something like, I'm going to say it was like over 70 odd percent, so 3/4 of people were like, there is a benefit to this. It benefits my day job. It benefits my career progression. And I think if it's done really well, and as you say, if that support is there, Junior, in the way that you're describing it, it can help with that next promotion. It can help with whatever it is that you want to do in terms of opening doors, etc. So yeah, getting that agreement up front is really useful, and it's really powerful. And that's it. I'm at the end of the questions. As I say, there's going to be there is going to be more of this, and I'm going to do more specifically just for the community of ERG leaders. I'm going to really be doing a lot more of that on YouTube, and creating a community where you can ask questions and maybe advise each other as well. So look out for more of that. When it comes to the lives, I'll be back next Friday. And as some of you may know, on the back of I've been talking about men's networks for a long time, but on the back of, adolescence and all of those conversations. And, I've done some posts around, should we have men's networks? And I did a little poll and everything. I've got some amazing guests that are coming on, mainly talking again about some of the challenges that men face, and then thinking about that in terms of what that means around men's networks or men's spaces, or how you create that. And that's kind of it. So thank you so much for joining me this morning. Slightly different format, but hopefully you enjoyed it. So I'm going to be doing more of this. You will be hearing more very soon about the YouTube channel. You'll be hearing more about what some global ERGs are doing, because I think there's some really useful lessons. If you haven't yet got your tickets for the summit, you need to do that, because it's shaping up to be absolutely fantastic. But yeah, if you've got any more questions that you maybe didn't want to ask publicly in this forum, this is part of the reason that I'm going to YouTube, right? Because I think it makes it easier for people to ask questions, etc. So if you want to DM me, you can do. If there's anything that you're really struggling with right now, you can absolutely DM me and ask. Lots to think about: recomms, cascade to remote teams, and engaging with sponsors. Absolutely. Oh, good morning, Chioma. How are you doing? It's really good to have you join. And so, yes, more to come. But if you're in the UK, and I guess, other places that have this Easter weekend as a long weekend, 4-day weeks, long may it continue. Have an amazing weekend. Thank you so much. If you joined me from start to end, Junior, I know you were here literally all the way through. Thank you so much. And if you're watching this on the replay, thank you so much for spending 53 minutes of your day with me. Have an amazing break. Enjoy the downtime and enjoy the Easter weekend. Ciao.